Hello, welcome to this first workshop in GraphXR. I'm going to be exploring the fundamentals of graph data and how to actually visualize and explore it using GraphXR's 3D visualization capabilities. Now today we're going to actually go over the basics, looking at what is a label property graph, or better known as property graph, and how is that modeled and organized. Second, we're going to then do a quick example using a CSV, simple CSV, and transforming that into a graph. And then third, we're going to save that work, show you how to share it and export it so that you can actually work with it or collaborate with others. And then last, we're going to connect a GraphXR project to a Neo4j Sandbox so that we can simulate more real-world use cases. In this case, we're going to be looking at crime investigation data based in the UK. And from there, we're going to use keyword search to look up specific people, specific types of crime, and then be able to pull in other entities by expanding on their relationships. Then, as we bring in all that data into one place, we'll be able to take it to a map and have further levels of analysis. So what is a label property graph? That is a way of encoding information as nodes, as connected edges, and properties. Those nodes are going to be people, places, locations, events. Edges are going to be what define a relationship between those entities. So in the example that we'll go over shortly, we're going to be looking at a call log, and that relationship is actually going to be the called relationship, as you'll note later. Lastly, the properties are going to be the characteristics within those nodes and edges, and that's going to include things like name, age, or lat long, for example. And it's important to know in GraphXR and in many graph databases, these patterns are encoded via the vertices of the graph, which is the node, and they have an ID and a descriptive label. So for nodes, that's going to be location or person. Now, edges will be identified by the source and target node IDs, and those will also have a descriptive type label, such as called or occurred at or knows, really to describe what is happening between these two nodes or these entities that we've defined as our nodes. And lastly, the properties are going to have key value pairs. So that's going to be the label of the property and the actual value. So that could be name, Andy, age, 32 years. That's a key value pair. So let's explore a very simple property graph. In this case, we're looking at people that have been contracted with companies, right? And you'll see the properties that are listed under the person node include the name, the education, and the licensing. And then in the company nodes, we have similar properties, but with name and then revenue, right? And that relationship also has its own properties, right? So this is showing when this person worked for each company. So property graphs are highly useful for large data sets, and especially streaming data sets. And it makes visualizing connected patterns a lot easier. Third is that data modeling is much more extensible in this format, which means that you can add or simplify your graph along the way. And then lastly, we can import and fuse different data sources. And just an example is if you have CSV or SQL data and connecting that to your document data like JSON or XML, for example. So right now we're going to go over a really quick example using CSV to graph. What we're going to do is two methods. We're going to explore that CSV by just dragging and dropping it into the graph space. Then we're going to also explore using the CSV mapping editor to show how you can create nodes and edges based on the columns of your CSV. And what that briefly looks like here is this. So this CSV mapping editor, really briefly, is going to show you how to map certain columns in our table as the nodes and as the edges in our graph. So I'll walk you through how that works and show you the differences on both sides. Alright, so before we get started with anything, we're going to sign up for a free GraphXR account by going to graphxr.kineviz.com/register, and you can copy that link from the description below. All you'll need to do is put your name, email, agree to the terms of use, and you're in. And once you're in, you're going to see a Homes Projects page that looks a lot like this. And we're going to start with a really quick example using CSV to graph. And so I'm going to create my first project here, clicking this plus sign. And I'm going to call it just that, CSV to graph. Alright, click confirm. And then you can enter the project. And here we are. Going to this call log, which is quite simple. We have 20 calls logged. Each row is a call from one person to another. And that also has the duration and the date and time as well. So if I were to simply download this from Google Sheets as a CSV file, which I could, great. I would go into an empty GraphXR project and simply drag and drop that into the graph space, and you'll notice that each row in that table becomes a node in the graph. And I can see that by just simply double clicking here. Here we have the investigative panel, and you'll notice that all the values across those columns are listed here as properties, right? And then we can close that. If we wanted to just hover over all these nodes just to get a quick view of what's inside them, you can use this quick info panel on the bottom here, and you can hover over those nodes and see what's happening. Alright, so really quickly I'm going to show you that we're in 3D graph space, and what you'll notice is that if I zoom in, you know, the nodes fly by me. So I can zoom in and out of my graph by using the scroll wheel of my mouse. I can also go to this bottom right navigation area as I'm circling, and I can zoom out this way and in this way. I can pan to the left or right, up and down by just simply left click and drag. I can right click and orbit the graph. This is going to be really relevant when the data is really big. And fun feature to note is that I can use Control O to orbit the graph using a turntable feature like that. And then I can stop that if I get dizzy, and just Control O again. Let's go back a little and just note that we drag and dropped this CSV. Every row became a node, but that doesn't tell us quite what we want to know, which is who's making these calls and to whom, right? So what we really want is to build that label property graph as so, showing where these calls are going to from one person to another, and just being able to really clearly illustrate who are the central people in this network that we're curious about. So the way we would do that is, I'm going to clear my graph here, is I'd go to the left side panel. I would select Query, and under the CSV tab, I'm going to load that CSV that I downloaded from Google Sheets. Alright, you'll see all the columns here as well. I'm going to create a new mapping by clicking New here on the bottom. And I'm going to hide myself really quickly here. And I'm going to show you how to create that mapping. Alright, so here we have a node to start. And the first node we want to create is a person node. So I'm going to go on the top right, top here, and relabel this node as person. And I'm going to hover over the edge of this node, left click and drag, and create another node. And I'm going to click that one and also call it person. So I'm making a person-to-person relationship, right? And this relationship that I can relabel when I click on it is going to be the called relationship. And I used all caps for relationships. It's just the colloquial way to show relationships in this case. We have person called person. Now we have to map certain columns to the node and certain columns to the edge. So for this person, the source node, I'm going to put the call from column, and I'm going to relabel the property name as just name, because that's what's under that property. It's the name of the person, right? Call from. And I'm going to select as key because that's going to deduplicate my data and show me only one of the same person, right? So if I have multiple rows representing John, I will only create one node for John. So then the target node, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to map the call to column there. Also relabel the property name as name. Set that as key. And then for the called relationship, I'm going to put the call ID, the date and time, and the duration of that call. I'm going to save and exit and call this my call log mapping. And save. Now, once I hit apply, you're going to see those relationships in those nodes that we just saw earlier. And I can close this left-hand panel and I can go to the top right, click this little node on the top right, choose an icon for the person nodes. So I looked up person, select that, great, close that. Can also change the color if I wanted to, so I'm going to change the relationship color to like orange, say. Alright, and then I want to add captions. That will make a lot more sense. So if I go to the left project panel and I go to the person nodes, I'm going to add the name property that we mapped as caption. Great. And then if I go to the settings, I can enable captions for my relationships by checking this box that says show relationship name. Alright. And if I, for whatever reason, need to make those captions bigger or smaller, I can do that as well. I don't want them too big, right? And if you'd rather have this in 2D mode, which in this case might make sense, right? You can enable 2D mode as well. That will make it so that you can't actually orbit the graph anymore. It will freeze it as such. Alright, so that's my quick CSV to graph method using the CSV mapping editor. And last thing to note also, there's this pin icon you'll notice on these nodes. That is to say that it's pinned in space, because in default we have force layout applied to all the nodes, and when you pin a node, you pin it in space and it disables force layout on that node. So you can always hide the pin icon if you like, and there you go. You don't have to see it on the node by going to the settings here. Alright, so now that I have this view that I've created that I'm proud of and I want to share with others, I can save my work by going to the project here, going under the data tab, and selecting here to write the name of this view. So I'm going to write call log, and I'm going to save that view. So this saves to the GraphXR cloud. I can share this view, and when I click that share link, And there you go, you have your share view. And you can tell that this is a share URL as well, right? So these shared views, they can be accessed from outside the organization. They don't have to have a GraphXR account to see this view that's been created. And you can enable certain UI in GraphXR, disable some of it, depending on what you want to share or allow the end user to have access to. If you'd like to learn more about how to customize the UI for a shared view, you can go to our Help Center with the link in the description below. Alright, so moving onward, now that I have that, I can also save this as a GraphXR file, which saves it locally to my computer. But if I were to clear this graph, I could just bring that back and the mapping be the exact same way I left off on. I can also save back to Neo4j. And lastly, I could save as a CSV, which would create a folder for the nodes, node labels, and as well as the edges. So those are a few ways you can save your graph, as you can see. Alright, so we're going to move on to a real-world example using Neo4j Sandbox. Now, Neo4j Sandbox supplies us with crime data that we can explore and get up and running in GraphXR right away. So this example, as you can see, we have the data model here. It's a bit more complicated. We have crimes, we have locations, we have people, and we have multiple relationships between people. We have included more specificity, looking at the officers who investigated these crimes, as well as the objects and the vehicles involved in these crimes, the phone calls. So you can see that our exploration can go in many directions. So I'm going to show you a couple directions, but if you're doing this for yourself, please feel free to pause and think about which other questions you could ask yourself based on this schema / data model that you see provided by Neo4j. Alright, so now that we're back here, we're going to create a new project. This time we're going to create a project that's configured to Neo4j Sandbox. Now, to get started with Neo4j Sandbox, all you gotta do is go to neo4j.com/sandbox, link in the description, and you're just gonna launch a free sandbox here. Once you click that, it will guide you to put in your email and password. Once you've done that, you'll be guided to this landing page where you have a bunch of different examples that you can choose from. Now, for this particular example that we're walking through, we're going to select the Crime Investigations sandbox and click Create. And you'll see that it'll take a few seconds just to load up here. Great. This will expire in 3 days, but you can, by clicking here, choose to extend it to 10 days. You can also explore AuraDB in Neo4j if you want to have a longer project. Now, you're going to hover over to connection details here and click it, and we're going to pay attention to the IP address and the password, and that's going to allow us to connect to Neo4j Sandbox to GraphXR. So if we go back to here, I'm going to create my next project. And this is going to be my, Crime Investigations. And I'm going to select this checkbox here that says Configure Neo4j Instance. And you'll notice that all these fields pop up. We go back to the sandbox. I'm going to copy the IP address to the Neo4j host and the password to the Neo4j password. Great. Once I've done that, I can hover over the connection type, and I'm going to select the through GraphXR server connection to enable project sharing. That allows me to save views in the clouds, as I previously showed you. If you want a direct browser connection, everything is local to your computer, And that's just for specific use cases if they want to keep everything private. And I'm going to select here, and we're going to click confirm. Alright, I'm going to enter my crime investigations project. Give it just a second. Here we are. Alright, back to GraphXR. We're going to go to this left-hand hamburger menu to pull out that left side panel. I'm going to click into the project, and you're going to notice these categories that populate on the left side here. Those categories are matching the categories of nodes that we just showed you in this view, right? We have the phone, person, location. We have the same thing here on GraphXR. So what we can do is pull nodes into the graph and quickly explore them from the Neo4j Sandbox. I'm going to select the crime nodes here. I'm going to pull those into the graph. And I can do that several times, and you'll notice that I'm pulling, if you look to the right here, I'm pulling 100 nodes here in the graph. I can also select the relationship tab and see all the relationships that are stored here in Neo4j. And I notice the occurred@1 one is going to bring me the location nodes. So if I select that and pull those in, you're also going to notice all these locations and how some of these crimes have happened at the same location. And I'm pulling approximately 25 nodes every time I click. Alright, I've done that enough. I can zoom out a little, or I can go to the bottom of my screen here. This is the flyout feature, which gives you that high level view of everything in the frame. And I can kind of orbit here, right click and drag. Alright. Now I'm going to show you some quick selection tricks now that we have nodes and several different nodes here and relationships. We have one relationship here with the occurred@. You'll see right away that some of these nodes have multiple relationships, so one to many. So if I select this node, double click it, I bring up that investigators panel. I can click the neighbors tab, and I can see really quickly here what crimes are connected to this location. Great. I can also select this and use the trace neighbor feature on the bottom here and go out by degrees. And what I do by just tracing the neighbor, I highlight the nodes, but then I have to also select visible nodes. So I select those nodes, and then I can do an inverse selection to select everything else and use the hide selection feature right here to hide everything. So that's going to be a helpful workflow in terms of being able to zone into specific patterns in our data, right? So I can then unhide everything and bring everything back. But that's a quick trick in the selection. Like I showed earlier, we can select by category or relationship. We can also select a group of nodes by left click, shift, and dragging a box over a group of nodes, like so. We can add to that selection by control left click. Then we can option or alt left click to take away from a selection. Whoops. Alright. And just how I moved those nodes like you saw earlier, that actually happens if you hold down 5 and left click on a group selection like so. deselect, double click in the blank space. And then if you want to unpin or just put everything back into force, default force layout, you can unpin the nodes on the bottom right here. You just hit it twice and it kind of relaxes into that force layout as we saw earlier. Alright, so let's clear our graph and let's start with some real world, let's start with some examples. So we have keyword search here on the top left. Now the keyword search, we can search the graph or search the database. So first things first, we're going to want to configure our search index before we search anything in the keyword search bar. For some people, this might already be configured and set up, so you might not need to do this. But if you're starting from scratch and using Neo4j Sandbox, you'll most likely have to configure the search index for this to work. Now, going to this gear icon, since this dataset doesn't have that many categories to search by, I can actually just search all category properties here. If there was far more, I would just be more selective about which categories you want to configure your search index to. And then I'm going to submit this index task. Great. Click the X. You might need to do like a quick refresh here. Alright, so now that we have that configured, I'm going to make sure I search the database here. And I'm going to look up drug crimes. Drugs. So here you'll see that there's 333 crime nodes with drug listed somewhere under the properties. You'll see that it's going to be mostly by the crime type property. Alright, so if I click this little plus icon, I'm going to bring all those crime nodes into the graph. And so now I know that those crimes actually have locations associated with them. So I'm going to select all these crimes. I'm going to right click and use the expand with selected nodes feature. This is my favorite feature. So here I'm going to select this occurred at relationship and then click expand. And as a reminder, the location nodes are going to be pulled in, right? Because those are the target nodes of our occurred at relationship. Great. And you'll see right away that some of these locations have a lot of crime nodes associated with them. Like, for example, this one. Alright. So now that we have our locations, we have some crimes in the graph, I'm going to go to the left side panel here and show you the properties within each of these categories. So under the crime nodes, we have date, we have an ID. I'm going to drag this left side panel out a little bit. We have a last outcome and the type of drug, right? And this one we did a filter on the drug crimes because we searched by them. Then we also, on this location category, we have the address, we have latitude, longitude, postal code. With the lat/long properties that are in the location nodes, we can actually take that directly to a map and see where these crimes are located, right? So if we go to the left here, I'm going to click on map. And orbit just a little bit here. Great. You're going to see that we're zoomed in on the Greater Manchester area. We have a bunch of location nodes tied to the map and crimes that are connected to those locations. I can adjust the settings of this map if I wanted to. If I go to the settings here, I can choose what kind of map I want, a Google map or OpenStreetMap, right? I'm going to exit here. And you can see that maybe I want to change the color of my nodes. In this case, I can put green. The edge I can make stand out more red, right? I can also decide how zoomed in and zoomed out I am in my map. So this map control, if I select it, I can zoom out and you'll see that all those nodes are gathered in this one part of the UK. If I click map control again, it freezes the map in that frame, so I can, orbit here and see. Lastly, I can hide map and I have my graph again. So that's a quick overview of the map feature. Let's go over another quick example. I'm going to clear my graph again. Let's say I want to look up a specific person of interest. In this case, I'm going to walk through this example of looking up a specific officer and the crimes that he's looking at, and then expanding upon the relationships to see who's involved in those crimes and where they have taken place. So for this, I'm going to actually search the database once again, and I'm going to search a name. So I'm going to look up Officer Larive, click enter, and you'll see one officer does show up on the left here. So I'm going to add that to the graph, and I can, see, I lost my node in the view. So when that happens, I always center to. There we go. And I'm going to add captions and icon to this node. So first icon, I'm going to go here and select person. And then I'm going to go to the left here. And then for officer, put the surname and even the first name. I can select multiple properties to caption if I want to, and click exit here. Great. So I have my caption, I have my officer. Now let's expand again to look at, that's right clicking to expand the crimes that he's investigated. Great. So these are his crimes that he's looking at. And what are those crimes exactly? Let's add those captions. I'm going to look at the crime type here. Sometimes if you have a lot of properties, you might need to scroll down to note and caption those crime properties. Alright, so in this case, I'm going to just kind of reiterate from my previous example. I want to just look at the drug crimes, right? But instead of searching the database, I can search the graph. So here on the top left, I'm going to switch to the graph. Great. And I'm going to look up drug crimes. And you're going to notice that these 3 nodes are highlighted. So out of all these crimes that he's investigating, only 3 of them are drug crimes. Alright, that's good to know. So let's get rid of everything else for this investigation. Right now I'm going to use the inverse selection, right, to select everything else. And I'm going to go here on the top right legend to deselect the officer. Alright, and I'm just going to hit delete. Great. So now I have just Larive and those 3 drug crimes that are of interest. Then from the crime nodes, I'm going to expand my relationship to show who is behind those crimes. So the party 2 and the occurred at, this is going to bring in locations, party 2 is going to bring in people. And I'm going to expand. Awesome. Now we have more people in the question. What are those people's names? I don't know yet. I have to go to caption those names like we did before. Alright, so we got names. And then for location, I'm going to put little icons on there. Just going to put GPS. There we go. And I'm going to change the color so it's not the same as the officer. So yellow, actually. Great. Alright. Alright, so now so far we have 3 drug crimes. One person's tied to 2 of those in the same location as well. And then we have a different location, a different person over here. Interesting. Alright, so then let's expand upon the person node. And going back to that model, we have several relationships upon itself. So person knows another person via their family network, or they know them through the social network, or they live with them, for example. So there are several different ways we can identify how people know each other. So I'm going to expand with the people nodes, and I'm going to use the family relationship, the knows with the lives with, the phone, the social network, and I'm going to expand. Alright, so I have a few more people in the network. Okay, gonna keep doing that one more time. Alright. Interesting. It's getting interesting. Alright, so I'm also gonna select all the persons in my network and see if they have other crimes that they're related to, and perhaps even other locations. I should have pulled in. So now all these crimes have locations, right? So I'm just expanding to get more information. Alright, now this is looking a little crowded. Interesting. Alright, so we got some things to note here. So let's go back to Larive. Let's search my graph again. Where is he? There he is. Okay, so there's Larive. And I'm going to use a quick layout here on the bottom of my screen. I can see the quick layout feature. And I'm going to apply a tree layout starting from Larive. Alright. So, and again, if you want to hide the pin icon, you can do that under settings. I'm going to put person in the person nodes. Okay, great. So here we have an interesting story. We have Larive that's investigating these 3 crimes, and then we have this 2 different locations and 2 different people behind those crimes. But then we have overlap between some of these people. And you can see here, if I were just to select this person and trace their neighbors, let's see. Yeah, you see this overlap all of a sudden happening, where this person, let me look at their name, Kathleen, happens to know via the social network Alan, right? And then Alan also knows Philip, right? And these people are related to each other. Interesting to note. Okay. And then these people live with each other. Okay. So there we can have some, now we can kind of start to question what's going on here. And we're also pulling in not just drug crimes in these later cases. We're seeing drugs, we're seeing vehicle crimes, right? We even see an instance of robbery. Alright, so what does this look like if we bring in the map feature real quick? I'm going to switch the map to the darker version, which is the map box. And I'm going to click exit. Alright, so you can see that they're all across different areas of the Greater Manchester region, but you can kind of tie down where some of these crimes occurred at, and who is a part of this network. And then in any case, you can actually select all these crimes and include the officers that are behind those crimes as well. So once I pulled in these officers and then I put them to the map, you can kind of then say, okay, this Officer Larive is investigating these 3 crimes, but within the social network, we have all these other officers investigating these crimes. There might be overlap as to what they're investigating and whether they need to collaborate, for example. So I'm going to close this, and I'm going to save this as a view of interest, and I want to also have my colleague take a look and investigate as well. I'm going to go to the left here, go to the Project Data tab, and save this as my geospatial view. Geospatial drug crime network. Alright, and I'll save that view. Alright, now I have a link that I can share and pass on to others to sort of say, hey, what do you see, and what other further questions can we ask out of this data set? Alright, so I think that's it for today. Thanks for tuning in to this sort of hands-on workshop over how you can get started with graph data. Thank you for taking the time, and happy graphing. Until next time.